And joining me now is Democratic Congressman from South Carolina, Jim Clyburn. So thank you so much, Congressman, for being here. And thank you for taking this Saturday to talk to me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. So this week, the Cook Political Report moved Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada from leaning Republican to toss-up as Vice President Harris begins to gain ground in polls. We've also heard North Carolina and maybe even Ohio. I was just talking to a source yesterday about Ohio being a place that maybe Vice President Harris could do better than President Biden in. So I wonder, what's your sense of the potential path to victory for Vice President Harris, especially as you look at these polls?
Well, you know, I think the path to victory is widening every day. There's more and more paths for her. And I would add Florida to that as well. They've got a little referendum down there taking place on the ballot that has made the difference in places like Ohio and Kansas. And I think it very well make the difference in this instance as well. And I do believe that there are more and more avenues opening up to the Harris-Walz ticket. And I think that this is a battle royale underway, and I think it's leaning toward the Harris-Walz ticket.
And as you mentioned, the Harris-Walz ticket, emphasis on the walls there. Of course, he was added to the ticket. Former President Trump has described him as a radical liberal. He's also said a number of other things. Take a listen to some of that.
He has positions that are just not, it's not even possible to believe that they exist. He's going for things that nobody's ever even heard of. Heavy into the transgender world, heavy into lots of different worlds having to do with safety. He doesn't want to have borders. He doesn't want to have walls. He doesn't want to have any form of safety for our country.
So J.D. Vance has also been accusing Walz of misrepresenting his time in the military. What do you make, first, of Vice President Harris picking Walz? But I also wonder, should Governor Walz come out and maybe say, I misspoke, I didn't say exactly the right thing, or really is what he said enough?
Well, you know, one of the things about the former congressman and governor, now VP contender, is his background and his experiences. When he first ran for Congress, I was invited by him and his wife out to his congressional district, which I thought was kind of interesting. I'm from South Carolina at the time, representing the majority, minority congressional districts. And I asked him, why me? And he said to me, your background and mine are so similar. Yeah, that may be true. But in this congressional district, this red district, where only one other Democrat had won in about 100 years, but I campaigned with him, and I saw how he connected with people. I went to a little school that he taught at, and the school that his wife was an English teacher. And I saw in him a certain fundamental goodness that ought to exist in every American. Jim is just an absolutely great person that you want to be around as often and as long as you possibly can be. And so I don't know what Trump is talking about, but I wish he would go to that congressional district, which, by the way, is a red district, and talk to those people, talk to those students he taught, talk to those young people who are having troubles with their sexual identity and looked for adult leadership. They went to Tim, of all people, the coach, and he agreed to be their advisor so that he could help them become good citizens. That's what being a good American is all about. And I wish that Trump would learn just a little bit of that. And I think that this country would be in a much better place today if he had practiced a little bit of civility, a little bit of goodness, and a little bit of what the American people really would like to see in their elected officials.
Yeah, I hear you, Congressman. I also just want to follow up. Do you think that Governor Walz should say more about his military background, maybe even say he misspoke, or do you think he said enough?
No, I think you should always respond to these kinds of accusations and respond with the record. He has laid out his record, and you look at that statement that they plan upon, he made it clear that he suffers a disability because he's in the artillery and what it did to his hearing, and those kinds of weapons that he was familiar with ought not be on our grounds. And he didn't say, these are the weapons I carried into war.
Well, he
These
did
are
say
the
that,
weapons of
Congressman.
war. Well, so he said the weapons of war which I carried, or did I carry them into war? I don't know exactly what he said. And if he did, got it reversed, yes, you may have gotten reversed and misspoke. But just say that, you misspoke. Everybody misspeak every now and then. I wish that this much reporting would be done on the lies that Trump tells. He doesn't tell the truth about anything. And we just let it stand. I watched that speech he gave in Montana or wherever he was the other day, and people just let it stand. And there wasn't any truth to it at all. So Tim Walz has got a big record for everybody to look at. And if that is the one little misspeak that you can come out of his record with, come on. I wish that all of us were that good with our speech.
Yeah. Well, as you talk about sort of former President Trump and what he hasn't said that's true, I was in the room when he claimed wrongly, falsely that Vice President Harris was just turning black. Those were his words. We know that she's identified as a black woman, as an Indian woman her entire life. Given that she's the first woman of color at the top of a major party's ticket, how big of a role do you think race and racism, some will say, will play in this election?
Well, I think that we were all kidding ourselves if we do not admit to the fact that they're fundamental to the development of this country. We're getting ready to celebrate our 250th anniversary in 2 years. And we all know that for a majority of those 250 years, we were a slave nation. And we have been working our way out of that, trying to find perfection. So much of what took place on January 6th goes back to the 1876 election, which was the first real contested election we had after Emancipation Proclamation. And so race is just basic to so much of what this country is all about. And it is not that we don't make mistakes. In fact, Alexis de Tocqueville said about this great country, our greatness is not that we are more enlightened than any other nation, but because we have always been able to repair our faults. And that's what Abraham Lincoln was doing, repairing a fault. That's what the Supreme Court was doing with Brown v. Board of Education, repairing a fault. That's what the Congress was doing in 1964, and 1965, and 1968, repairing faults. Those are the things you do on your way to achieving a more perfect union. And that's what we ought to be about. Continuing that pursuit of a more perfect union. And so I would say to the other side, join us in that pursuit rather than trying to turn the clock back as was done before. That is not where we are going. She is right. We are not going back. We are leaning forward in every way that we possibly can.
Yeah, and a lot of those crowds, I saw a lot of crowds, people chanting, "We will not go back," in T-shirts when I was covering her this week. I want to ask you about the debate. It seems as though we're going to get at least one debate, which is the ABC News hosted debate on September 10th. After the fallout from President Biden's last debate performance, what advice would you give Vice President Harris as she faces off against Trump?
I would just say be yourself, answer the questions, and don't let these misspeaks, we may call them, or just outright lies, stand. Challenge him everywhere you possibly can. I used to be a debater back in college, and I know how to deflect, and I have talked with this lady a lot. We have discussed issues, and let me tell you something. He is in for an experience. If I've ever seen anybody who knew how to deflect with a debate, it is Kamala Harris. She knows how to do that. And I would ask anybody who may question that, just go back to some of those hearings she had when she was sitting in the United States Senate. Ask former Senator Sessions about that. Ask a couple of these Supreme Court justices, the former Attorney General, ask him what it was like to get questions from her. So I would hope that whatever this format is, that it'll allow for them to question each other at some point during the discussion. And I think the American people will be in for one good educational experience.
Yeah. And you know the president better than most. How is he doing? Is he sad, especially as there's a public battle, it seems, between him and Nancy Pelosi? We heard a lot this week.
Well, you know, I have not talked to him this week, but the last time I talked with him, he was very upbeat. Because just take a look at this. This man served 8 years as vice president to the first African-American president in these United States of America. This man, when he got the nomination, he selected the first woman to run on the ticket with him. And he just handed it off to that woman and endorsed her to succeed him as president. His place in history is going to be so cemented. There won't be another person before, and it'll be a long time after that will match his place in history. And I think Joe Biden knows that, and I think he's going to enjoy that. He's going to speak to this convention on the first night, on that Monday, I think, and going off on vacation, he will watch us select his successor, and I think he's going to enjoy it with real pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday, Tim Clyburn.